10 years ago when you said Donald Trump was an authoritarian. And you know what, Scott, I've got to hand it to you. That was a remarkable forecast because 10 years later, I think you called it. Here's Donald Trump today, the man with the heart and soul of a fascist, showing us he now has the bona fides by tonight.
A CNN segment featuring Scott Jennings and Miles Taylor is being framed as a tense exchange that draws attention for its direct back and forth. Moments like this tend to stand out because of how sharply participants challenge each other, making the discussion feel more intense than a typical panel. These clips often gain traction due to their unpredictable nature and the broader political divide they reflect. Debates like this often resonate more for their dynamics than any single statement. What stood out more to you, the arguments or the delivery?
A lot has happened tonight. Buckle up. Marjorie Taylor Greene is learning what it feels like to be on Trump's bad side. She has been one of the most vocal Republicans calling for the full release of the Justice Department's investigative files on Jeffrey Epstein. And now President Trump tonight is unendorsing. He is withdrawing his endorsement of Marjorie Taylor Greene and writing on Truth Social that all I see wacky Marjorie do is complain. And then he added that I can't take a ranting lunatic's call every day. There was a lot there. So you can go and then talk about a lot. Then MTG fired back with screenshots of text messages that she claims that Trump is lying and that she did not call him, also saying that it is astonishing, really, how hard he is fighting to stop the Epstein files from coming out. She argued that she has been one of Trump's strongest supporters, but that she doesn't, quote, worship or serve Donald Trump. On top of unendorsing, he actually said that he would support anyone who would be primarying her in the upcoming election. Who wants to take this one on?
Well, I can tell you that is not unusual in politics. Political romances are often short-lived. And she has been critical of him not only about the Epstein files, but about his involvement in foreign affairs. And I don't mean with women. I mean in various parts of the world.
You said it, no.
Just to clear the table on that one. and so it's not surprising that they have had a breakup of sorts. After all, he didn't give her a ring. He just supported her for a little while.
Listen, this fire is spreading. I mean, right? It started off talking about Epstein in the beginning. Then during the shutdown, she was one of the few Republicans to correctly identify Donald Trump's unwillingness to deal with the ACA subsidies and lower healthcare costs for Americans as being one of the reasons why the shutdown occurred.
Yeah, she was very outspoken about that.
Now she's talking about foreign policy. This is not going away. Whatever is going on between them seems to only be heating up, and I think the rest of us should get the popcorn.
I think
they're here for it.
And a war with words, sorry, Scott, a war with words with Donald Trump is such a risky business that I cannot believe she has the bravery to engage in it, because even if she was right, she's still going to lose.
Is there an example of anyone beating Donald Trump at this game?
Never. This is his game, and he's great at it, and she's barking up a tree that she's going to fall on her really hard.
You know, it's interesting. He has some people who profess to be strong supporters who do oppose him more often than the people that you might not think are his strongest supporters. She's one of them. Thomas Massie in Kentucky is another one. Rand Paul, my home state senator, he takes on Trump, although they profess to be Trump supporters. In this case, I think he had the order out of order. I trace all this back to his decision, the righteous decision to strike Iran. She was against it. So were some of the people who occupy that wing of the party. He defied them. And since that time, they all seem to be stridently picking at him on this issue or that. And then, of course, everybody knows in Washington, Miles, you know, the fastest way to get in front of a television camera if you're a Republican is to come out and crap on Donald Trump. And so that is what she is doing.
But, you know, Scott,
that is what she is doing.
Because she is mad at him
over these issues, and that's what happens.
There's a clear disagreement here over how to interpret political behavior. But beneath that disagreement is a broader question about incentives and accountability inside modern party politics. Framing someone like MTG as merely chasing attention simplifies what may actually be a more layered pattern of dissent, especially when speaking out inside a party can come with real political consequences rather than guaranteed benefits. When the discussion points to Republicans who have challenged party leadership, such as Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, the reality is that their experiences complicate the idea that internal criticism is an easy path to visibility or influence. In multiple documented cases, figures who broke with the party line faced loss of influence, diminished standing within the party, and in some instances, electoral defeat. That context makes the claim that criticism is mainly a strategy for media exposure far less straightforward than it's sometimes presented. There's also an important institutional angle tied to how Scott Jennings is framing the situation. The role of members of Congress is not limited to echoing leadership. They are expected to evaluate decisions, including major foreign policy actions like the Iran strike mentioned in the discussion. When disagreements over issues like that are characterized primarily as disloyalty rather than policy differences, it shifts the conversation away from governance and toward personal allegiance. Another key tension in this exchange comes from how policy judgments are treated. If a decision is described as righteous, primarily because of who made it, rather than being analyzed on its merits, it reduces space for genuine debate. That kind of framing can make it harder to distinguish between principled agreement and unquestioned support, especially when applied consistently across issues. Overall, the disagreement isn't just about MTG, Scott Jennings, or any single policy. It reflects a broader divide over whether political parties should prioritize strict alignment with leadership or allow room for internal disagreement. In a democratic framework, the ability of figures like MTG or critics within the same party to question decisions made by leaders such as Donald Trump is not inherently a sign of opportunism. It can also be a normal part of how oversight, debate, and representation are supposed to function.
Scott, I trace it further back than that. I trace it back to 10 years ago when you said Donald Trump was an authoritarian. And you know what, Scott, I've got to hand it to you. That was a remarkable forecast because 10 years later, I think you called it. Here's Donald Trump today, the man with the heart and soul of a fascist, showing us he now has the bona fides. By tonight, ordering investigations into American citizens. That's why members of his party, members of his
he's running the executive branch. Why are you so upset he's running the executive branch?
For the same reasons you predicted he shouldn't. For the same reasons, Scott, you said he violated his oath and he should never be back in that office. That's why I'm upset for the man being in the Oval Office.
I happily voted for him 3 times.
I know that.
The alternative was terrible.
And a lot of your friends were shocked.
Yeah, well, a lot of my friends would have been shocked at you trying to subvert the elected president of the United States, which you did.
Well, I proudly did. I proudly
some
said
mid-level
to the
staffer
country
substituting his judgment for the elected president of the United States.
Well, Scott, I would have loved to have seen you stand up to it.
Good luck.
What's being highlighted here is less about a single exchange and more about the tension between past warnings and present political alignment. When someone like Miles Taylor references earlier statements made by Scott Jennings, the focus shifts toward consistency, whether long-standing concerns about executive behavior remain valid when the political context evolves over time. The argument being made is that if earlier warnings about authoritarian tendencies were sincere and grounded in principle, then revisiting or even reaffirming those concerns in the present moment should follow naturally. In that sense, Miles Taylor is positioning his critique not as a break from those earlier assessments, but as a continuation of them under new circumstances. From this viewpoint, opposing actions perceived as overreach isn't framed as partisan positioning, but as an extension of standards that were already articulated years ago. At the same time, Scott Jennings's response, viewed through his past commentary and current stance, introduces a broader question about how individuals reconcile earlier predictions with later political decisions. It raises the issue of whether continued support for a figure despite earlier criticism reflects a change in belief, a recalibration based on outcomes, or a prioritization of other factors, such as policy preferences or perceived alternatives. In political reality, those calculations often overlap, making consistency more complex than it appears on the surface. There's also a clear distinction being drawn between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. Miles Taylor's position emphasizes adherence to constitutional norms and democratic safeguards, suggesting that objections to certain actions are not inherently rooted in party allegiance, but in concerns about governance and accountability. From that perspective, disagreement with leadership is treated as a normal and even necessary function within a democratic system, rather than an act of defiance for its own sake. Ultimately, the exchange reflects a deeper divide over how political consistency is defined and measured. One interpretation treats consistency as maintaining the same standards regardless of which party or figure is in power, while another allows for adjustments based on changing contexts, outcomes, or priorities. The friction between those perspectives is what makes this moment stand out. It exposes how the same past statements, the same warnings, and the same present-day actions can be interpreted very differently depending on whether one prioritizes principle as a fixed benchmark or as something applied through evolving political judgment.
GG, is it the sign of a changing tide? Is it the sign, or is it a singular one back and forth between one Republican who is getting into a fight with Donald Trump? Or do you think there is a possibility that it is the beginnings of Republicans seeing past the Donald Trump era?
The short answer is that we don't know.
Because you've got like Thomas Massey saying exactly that. Like, your vote on this discharge petition is going to outlast Donald Trump's time here. So you need to consider that when you make your decision.
But if we keep paying attention, what we see is that last week, the president got his clock clean in an election. All the Republicans got their clock clean in an election. This week, we see what's happening with the Epstein files. So next week, we're going to see them take a vote. And if we see a bunch of Republicans defect on the Epstein files, I think what we're seeing is the real testing of the waters to find out whether or not you can oppose Donald Trump and still get elected. When we talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene, the one thing we haven't talked about yet is her fundraising prowess. And according to sources, she is the most popular fundraiser in the Republican Party other than Donald Trump.
This
prediction about no one's going to care about this.
I was asking it a question. I wasn't predicting it.
No, you said people were somebody said that this was going to outlive.
Tom Massey.
And the prediction that this was going to outlive. I totally disagree with that. I think right now more people are worried about whether they can watch ESPN on YouTube TV tomorrow than they care about this. And that's certainly going to be true in 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years from today.
But what they do care about, hold on, but what they do care about,
they did not get their clocks cleaned last week.
They do care about the fact the president is sort of breaking everything. Right? They see a hole in the White House right now. I was in Detroit last weekend for an event, and it was the number one thing people came up to me at the scholarship dinner to ask about. Is it okay for the president to tear down the White House without anybody's permission?
That was the number one thing?
That was the number one thing that people brought up unprovoked.
Ridiculous.
To find out about.
I keep hearing this over and over again. It's like, no one cares about this because they only care about that.
You know what they care about? They can't buy a house.
That they can't. They care about
houses
affordability.
Unaffordable, and that food costs too much. But they don't care about the White House. The fact is, a president who can't model the White House.
Many people care about the White House.
That's ridiculous.
Many Americans care about the White House.
Make major
you don't care about the White House.
Can't remodel a room in the White House.
He remodeled it. He tore it down.
Tomato tomato.
In the middle of a government shutdown.
I couldn't tear down my garage without getting a permit from the city.
And that's what
regulations. Let me ask you this.
This part of the exchange centers on a disagreement about how concerns are being framed versus what those concerns actually represent. When Betsy dismisses the issue by comparing it to routine White House remodeling, the argument being presented is that this comparison may be oversimplifying two very different categories of action: standard maintenance versus major structural changes that typically require oversight, approvals, and adherence to established procedures. The White House is not just any building. It is a historically significant landmark and a symbol closely tied to the functioning of American democratic institutions. Because of that status, alterations are generally expected to follow preservation protocols and involve coordination with relevant oversight bodies and historical committees. From that perspective, equating routine interior updates with large-scale structural modifications can be seen as blurring an important distinction between everyday maintenance and changes that may carry broader institutional and procedural implications. There's also a broader point being made about public concern and the range of issues citizens pay attention to. The argument challenges the notion that people can only focus on a single priority, such as economic pressures like housing affordability or rising food costs, while ignoring questions related to governance, transparency, and institutional integrity. In reality, public interest is not exclusive. individuals can simultaneously care about their immediate financial conditions and also pay attention to how government decisions are carried out, especially when those decisions involve nationally significant spaces and processes. Another layer of the discussion involves how arguments are constructed in public discourse. When concerns are minimized by suggesting that no one cares, it can function as a rhetorical strategy that reframes the debate away from the substance of the issue. Rather than directly addressing whether proper procedures were followed or whether oversight was applied, the focus shifts toward dismissing the relevance of the concern itself. This kind of framing can shape perception by implying that the issue lacks importance, even in situations where people are clearly discussing or questioning it in public forums. Ultimately, what's being emphasized here is the importance of context, proportionality, and accuracy when evaluating claims. Comparing routine maintenance to major structural changes does not fully account for the differences in oversight, significance, and public accountability involved. In a democratic system, scrutiny of government actions, including how national landmarks are maintained, is a normal and expected part of civic engagement. The disagreement in this segment is therefore less about renovation itself and more about whether the framing used in the argument reflects the actual nature and seriousness of the concern being raised, or whether it simplifies it in a way that avoids engaging with the underlying issue.